that wasn't in the forecast, but let's get started anyways. Okay, so I know my first few videos were probably pretty boring, just watching some guy move dirt. Camera's having a hard time focusing. Anyways, what's going to happen today is we're going to get started on some exciting stuff, which will be the trellis that's going to go along the back side of here. So the plan is this. We're going to run a couple of stakes along here, and we're going to put in 4 posts, and the trellis is going to be about 7 feet tall, and then it'll be about 16 feet wide, and it's going to be 3 panels that are about 5 by 5. So I'm going to actually slow this video down a little bit and kind of do a how-to on how to set up how to make a trellis. So what I'll end up doing is kind of showing you the string line, digging out the post, sinking the post, and then how to put it all together in the end. So be sure to stick around. What we're going to do is we're going to run a string line right along the edge of this where I built up the dirt here. So about where you see that tree over there, we'll run a string line along here, and then that way we can set our post in here. So be pretty simple. I'm just going to have to measure off of, I can use this fence as a guide, measure back over there and measure back over here, and then get a nice straight string line compared to this fence over here. Okay, so I got both of these stakes 4 feet off of this fence, which is going to line us up towards the back end of this new dirt that I had dug up. So let me go ahead and run a string line, and then we'll determine where we're going to put our fence posts. Okay, so we have our nice straight line. I know a lot of people build these trellises a few different ways. What I'm gonna do is build it what I believe is the simplest way to build it, which is also the best looking way. So I'm gonna build it more like a fence, sink my post, and then start to fill it in. And some people will build them and then put them in, but I think that way is actually more difficult. This way is actually a lot easier, in my opinion. So let me go ahead and get started on marking out the post and get those dug out. All right, so these are the cattle panels we're going to use for this trellis. They're 5 feet tall, and then I just cut them down to a little bit over 5 feet. And I like this style because it has the 4-inch by 4-inch grid, so they're square. There's about 3 different styles that you can use, but I prefer this style. So what I'm going to do for setting these fence posts is I'm going to cut these at about 57 inches, and then that gives me on each side about 1/2 inch that I can work with to fit it in between the fence posts. So what I'll do is I'll set the fence posts at 57 inches apart, and then I can I'll actually set this fence post at slightly over 56, and then I'll be able to cut these a little bit to fit in the fence post. And the reason why I'm only going 57 and not all the way out to 5 is because the top piece along the fence is going to be 16 feet. I didn't want to use 2 pieces, so I need to make sure that the 3 panels I'm building fit within that 16-foot distance. Probably doesn't make a lot of sense right now, but once I start to put it together, it will make complete sense. So let me go ahead and start getting these fence posts set. We know we want to set them right about 56.5, 57 inches, somewhere in there, and that'll work out perfectly for what we're building. Okay, so we know our first post is going to go right here. So what I'm not a professional fence builder, but I'm pretty confident this is kind of the way that I've come up with making nice straight lines, usually pretty accurate. So what I like to do is get a level, put it against that string line. Doesn't have to be perfect. We just want to make sure that we're pretty close to level. And what we're going to do is just dig a little spot out. And that represents where my first post will go in. and then we'll just continue moving down the line. Okay, now that I determined where my first post is going to go, went and got all of these. And remember, we're trying to keep this, doesn't have to be perfect. We're trying to keep it between 57 and 58 inches. I think I'm going to go with, I'm going to try and space these out at about 58 inches. I think that'll it'll give me more room to move those, to snip those cattle panels to fit them in between here. And also I was hoping to keep it 5 feet. So then that way the cattle panels would have been 5 feet by 5 feet, a perfect square, but I'm not going to be able to do that. So trying to get it as close as possible to that. So we'll space these about 58 inches. All right, I have to back up here. So that's the rough layout for this trellis. So basically it's going to come in right around 16 feet across. So it's a pretty substantial trellis. And part of the reason why I'm building this trellis is the neighbor behind us. We're in a new complex and I wouldn't say they're the most friendly neighbors. So I'm trying to create some privacy between us. That's why I strategically built these bamboo structures over there, and I'm going to try and do something similar with this trellis. So in the summertime, we won't even see each other when all these trees have their leaves in and this is covered with whatever I'm going to have on it. Okay, so we got the post set, and here's the important part, is this string right here. So what I did is I ran a string along the bottom here, and you can see that the posts, let me get a little bit closer. You can see that the posts fall right along this string line. So this is the important part of having a straight fence or a straight trellis. If you run a string line along here, you can run top string lines too, but run a string line along here, and then once you go ahead and level this post, and if you do that, if everything is level off of this string line and then level up, all of this should be perfectly straight. So I'm going to go ahead, for those curious, I only went down 18 inches. 18 inches is plenty for a structure like this. I've built something even bigger than this, held up for over 10 years, so I'm not too worried about it. Those I built last year. So 18 inches, pretty easy on this tool right here. It's basically from here up to there. So once I hit that hinge, I know it's time to stop. So I'm going to go ahead and get the, let me back up and show you just how big this thing's going to be. Yeah, it's going to be a huge trellis. So you notice I threw a little dry gravel in there, and the reason why I do that is I like to get it level before I start pouring in the wet gravel and get committed to it. So right now, against the line, against the line right there, and it's pretty much level. And then once I get this in, I'll be able to go ahead and finish up the leveling. You can actually just pour this right in the hole. You don't have to wet it, but I don't like to do it that way. I like to make sure I want it to be set so that I can get started on it. All right, this fence post is set. I'm going to put a little more in on the base there. It's all level. And then I'll continue working my way down. Make sure that I have around 58 inches, 57 to 58 inches in between these posts. And once I get these set, I can start working on the other parts of it. I got these two posts set before, but before I went any further, I wanted to just, in case anybody's doing this, if you're going to stain these and they're going to be exposed, make sure you wipe off this concrete. Otherwise, you'll get, that'll show through your staining. So I always just take a rag, wet it down, and then just clean it up. These won't be exposed, but I still like to clean them up just in case they are ever exposed one day. Posts are in. They're all set. Let me kind of go over here and show you the purpose of this string line. Okay, so if you look at the string line here, let me see if I can get the right angle. It's really muddy and I'm getting stuck here. So the string line, if you look, it hits every single post. And what you're trying to do is just line these bottoms up with this string line. And that'll get you a straight line for your fence line. It'll make a completely straight line. Now, if you were running a long fence, you'd want to run a string line on the top too. It'll just make it that much easier. What I did is just lined everything up at the bottom string line and then just leveled it all. So everything will be level. Okay, so we were trying to get about 58 inches between posts to fit those panels in there. So this one is, hard to read. Okay, so this one is 58 and a quarter, 58 and an eighth. So right about where we wanted to be. So I believe that one down there is like 58 and a half. This one's 58 and a quarter, and I think this one's like 58 and a half. So they're all lined up pretty well. You won't even notice it. Doesn't have to be perfect. Once the panels are in there and everything's lined up, nobody will notice that it's off just a little bit. So since it's such a mess today, my plan was to get this all done today, but I don't want to work in this mud. So what I'm going to do is smooth out all these piles right here, smooth out all these footprints now in the mud, and then tomorrow's supposed to be a really nice day, so I can go ahead and get this whole thing constructed, get it stained, and it'll come together real nice. Stay tuned. All right, start of day 2. Weather's a little bit nicer. Not supposed to rain, but kind of looks like it's going to rain. Anyways, so what we're going to work on today is getting this whole thing complete, but we'll start with these bottom rails here, and then we'll start building the strips that'll come along here that will hold the panels in place, and then we'll finish it off with the top rail and start to get this thing put together and stained. So I'm going to go in the shop and kind of go over a few things on the lumber that I'm using for this, and why I decided to go with the lumber that I'm going to actually use. All right, so most of this lumber was bottom of the barrel. I got it over at Lowe's. It was the bottom of the stack. It's not the prettiest stuff, but that doesn't really matter because I'll cut away that. I won't be using it. So as I'd mentioned, this is going to be a 16-foot trellis. So we have a 16-foot board here that will go along the top, and then there's also another 16-foot board here. So there's two 16-foot boards. One will be for the top, and then one I'll cut into the 58-inch sections for the bottom rail. So I buy the 16-foot sections because it ends up being less expensive. Just depends on what you can haul home, because when you cut it down, it ends up being less expensive. Now what's going to happen with these 2x6s is these are going to become the strips to hold in the railing. So what I will end up doing is cutting these down to 1-inch pieces. So each, can't really show you with holding the camera, but they'll be cut down into 1-inch sections, and I'll flip them over and I'll make them 1-inch square pieces. So these will go against a rail to hold it in. The other thing that people often do is they will cut a groove in here to hold the rail, which is fine. It'll save you on cost, but I think as far as looks, it doesn't look as good. And the only thing that worries me is you're losing a little bit of the structure of the 2x4 by cutting it straight down the middle. And then the other thing is that the water will start to collect in that little groove. So I think that's going to hurt it long term. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to put 1-inch strips. So a 1-inch strip on each side of that rail that'll hold it in, and the water can then it won't be stuck on this board. It can actually start to wick its way out through the sides. So I think that it's a better way for long term, and I also think it looks a lot better when I start to get it put together and stain it. It'll make a lot more sense, and you'll start to understand. But there are two different ways to do it. Not saying either way is right. If you're doing a long run for a fence, it's probably more economical just to cut the strip. So just depends on what you're looking for. So I just got this piece cut out, and I wanted to kind of show you how it actually looks against this board. So this piece goes here, gets attached to this board, and then we put in the cattle panel here, and then we'll put another piece here and then squish it in between. One of the reasons why I like this as opposed to the strip is you can see it kind of starts to build up a little bit of a profile here, which looks really nice when it's all done. So I'll have to continue cutting all of these 2x6s down because I need quite a few of these. And then I'll cut these down and we'll start to put it back together. So we got all these ripped down to 1-inch square pieces. Had a bunch of these little slats left over too. So they're about 1/2 inch thick. So I can snap those together too and make some sort of little wooden trellis to have something climb up. So I'll do that later on. I also wanted to mention that if you don't have a table saw to do something like this, to rip down 2x6s, that's not a problem. I like these, the 1-inch size, because they're, I think they look a lot better. But if you want to build something like this, you can actually, in the garden center, they have 3/4 inch strips like this. So that's something that you can also use if you want to build this and you don't have the equipment to actually rip stuff down like this. So I just wanted to make sure I mentioned that. Let's get into the backyard and start measuring for the bottom rails and start to put this together. Getting exciting now. One of the things I wanted to mention is when you're assembling wood products that has a treated lumber, and my uprights for this trellis are treated lumber, you want to make sure that you get a fastener that's for use with treated lumber. So in this particular case, these are basically exterior screws approved for use with treated lumber. I'll use those for the rails, and then for the little slats that'll hold in the cattle panel, I'll use these stainless steel brad nails. So make sure that you guys get the right fasteners. If you don't, the chemical reaction in the treated lumber will actually start to deteriorate these, and they'll just disintegrate. So make sure you get the right fasteners. So we have the box against the trellis uprights, and I also ran a string line. Just looking at the string line in the box, there's a little bit of a dip on the ground here. So from that point to this point, it's pretty even. It's pretty level. Not a big deal. We're gonna go ahead and straighten that stuff out. We just wanted to get as close as possible. What I'm trying to determine now is where we're gonna start our first piece of the trellis on the bottom rail here, because I want it to be slightly above the box. So then that way I can have the climbers go right up the trellis. So we'll start right here in this corner, and then we'll run it across level. And then what we'll end up doing is leveling the ground to the trellis, these boxes, the ground, the boxes, the trellis. So it'll all be level, it'll all be square. Okay, so we're at 58 3/8. So I'm going to cut it slightly larger than that so we can get a nice snug fit in here. So let me go get that piece cut, and then we'll start to work our way down the whole line. So our opening was 58 3/8. So I cut it like 1/32 longer, and that way I can get a nice tight snug fit in there. So I had mentioned we're starting at this point. This is where the top of the box was when I put it in place. So this, I won't be building the dirt up any higher along here. So basically, this is where we're going to start, and we're going to keep it level all the way across. And then afterwards, what we'll do when we bring the boxes in is we'll go ahead and backfill some of the lower spots over here so that everything matches up. So the concept is the bottom of the box will be here. So this is where the trellis will start. So this will be the reveal of the trellis. Then we'll have the build-in piece, and then we'll have the cattle panel that goes up. So we'll go ahead and train everything up through here. So once I get all these bottom rails set, then we can start measuring up 50 inches and then cut the caps off, cut the tops off up there, and start to fit the slats along here, and then we'll cut the cattle panels to fit in there. I always like to put a clamp underneath here so when I drill through, it doesn't slip down. I always drill when I'm putting screws in, so I will put a drill through here, and then I will follow that up with that to make a space for the head, and then I'll drive it through. I always do it that way because I don't want to go through all this hard work and then have this piece crack right here. So always make sure you drill. All right, so I'm going to do the same thing, but I'm going to do it on the bottom side. And what I'm actually doing here is I'm going to, all these fasteners will be concealed. So when I run my strips along here, it'll cover this fastener. And I like that look because then you don't see any of the screws. The only fasteners you may see would be the brad nails, but you won't really see them. So the first rail, bottom rail, is in nice and level. So what we're going to do now is move on to the next one and keep it in a nice straight line. So we'll put this speed square underneath here and just make a nice mark here. And that's where we're going to line up the bottom of our next board so that this will be nice and straight all the way through. Bottom rails are set. The ground's playing a little bit of an optical illusion. Kind of looks like it's sloping that way, but I still need to completely grade the ground just for reference. It's all completely level. So the next thing we're going to do now is we're going to measure from this bottom rail up to the top to the same height as the cattle panel. They should be 60 inches, and we'll probably go about 60, a little bit under 60 and a half, a little bit over 60 and a quarter, somewhere around there. Just give us a little bit of wiggle room. So you notice I cut these by hand. What I do is I just mark it all the way around and then just follow that line with the saw blade. I've tried the circular saw in the past. I can't seem to hold that thing straight, so I've always just stuck with the hand saw, and it's worked out pretty well. Wouldn't say I'm perfect, but it gets the job done. the post cut. We're going to cut the top rail and attach that. And we're actually going to measure from the bottom. And the reason why we're measuring from the bottom, we want it to be the same distance on the top when it's all said and done. So 189 1/8. So I'll cut that top rail and I'll get it attached up there. So this is why I like to measure from the bottom. So I did it 189. It actually ended up being 189 1/4. So you can see it's flush here. But then if we go down here, you can see it's almost an inch shorter, but that's okay, because what we'll do is we'll fasten that in first, and then we'll pull this in so that it'll be a square. What happens is these posts, they start to bow in little places, but we'll get that all corrected. In order to pull that tight, I used a clamp-on clamp. So what I did was I clamped this to the top rail, and then I went in with this clamp and clamped it to here, and then pulled it flush to the end there. Now that the top rail, the two end pieces are set, we're going to do the same thing for these pieces right here. I'm going to measure from the bottom, and we get the same dimension up there, and I'll do the same thing over there, and then in theory this piece should be square too. Here we go. Frame is all done. Get those slats installed now. So I'll continue adding all those slats all the way around here for all of these sections here. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to end up coming back and staining this before I put the cattle panel in, because it's harder to stain. The part that I see the most, I want to make sure that it's stained all the way. So I'll make sure that I stain that before I start to put it all together. Well, that's not good. And it's short. Okay, got all this framed. I'm gonna grab the stain, get the inside of this stained, and onto the cattle panels. I'm gonna use the Behr Premium semi-transparent slate. It's the same thing I used on those bamboo privacy panels over there. Just gonna use a cheap brush for now, just to get this inside done. I don't want to stop and have to clean a brush. So let me get to it. Okay, so I got this stained. So all we were trying to do is just get this piece stained right here, because once the cattle panel goes in, it's really difficult to stain it from either side. So get that stained before you put your cattle panel in. So now that we have it stained, this piece in, we can cut the cattle panel to size and then pop it in, and then we'll cut these new pieces on this side and sandwich it in, and then we're pretty much done. We just have to stain it. So let me go ahead and get over there and start cutting that I'll measure this first, then I have to go over there and cut that cattle panel. So my first fence panel is 58 1/4 from that square to this square. It's 56. So what I'm going to do is cut these 1 inch off on each side, and then it should drop right in. So 56 plus 1, 57, 1 inch over there, 58, gives me a 1/8 inch wiggle room on each side. So I'm going to go ahead and start cutting these. construction is complete. Give you guys a little bit of a view before I stain it. One of the reasons why I stained in here, you can see how difficult it'll be to get in there to stain it. I don't really care about this side because I'm not going to be looking at it. So now I just need to stain it, and this project will be complete. Hope you guys can hear me. It's absolutely miserable out here with the wind. But I'm done with the first coat of stain. And you can see it's splotchy. And that's kind of how it is when just the wood sucks up the first part of the stain. But what I'm going to do is put on a second coat. And you guys want to make sure if you're doing this, you put your second coat on right away. Don't let this completely cure. So right now it's kind of tacky. I wouldn't say it's dry, but I'm just going to go right over it right now. And then what I'll do in the morning is I'm going to do a reveal after it's all dry and the black is popping. And you guys will get a good view of how this whole thing turns. Wow, that actually turned out nicer than I imagined. Okay, so that's it for this build. I hope you found a little inspiration for yourself and can go out and do something in your backyard, build a trellis like this. Just remember, keep your string line straight at the bottom, your post straight to that string line, dig your holes, get your post set, and then start building it in just like I showed you in the video. If I had to rate this, I mean, it's not an advanced build. It's kind of an intermediate. Doesn't take a lot of skills, doesn't take a lot of special tools. You notice that I did rip a few things down on my table saw. I did use a few power tools, but you can realistically build a trellis like this with a few hand tools, a drill, a hand saw, and get the 3/4 inch slats from the big box stores. You'd probably need a little bolt cutter, so make sure you have a bolt cutter. But that's about it for this build. If you have any questions, if you need any advice on how to build something like this, feel free to ask in the comments. I'm trying to do my best to keep up with the with any comments that come through, trying to be active on my YouTube page, and I would appreciate it if you could give me a like and possibly a subscribe. Thank you for watching. Be sure to tune in for as I continue to build my garden. Thank you.